When I go out, I like to eat Thai cuisine. Now let's build daily interaction number 17. Hey, what's up everyone? John with WebDev for you, and welcome to the Daily Interaction series, where every weekday we build a new interaction or animation in Webflow. Today we're going to build a menu trigger animation on click. So here if I click, we see we have this interesting animation, and we could connect this to a full screen menu or any type of menu to have the menu come in. All right, so it's just a fun little animation, and it can be a bit more exciting than just having an icon for the menu trigger button. All right, looks good. So this was inspired by this website here, Kudos Memorabilia. Their menu trigger is that kind of similar animation, and then they have a flyout menu from the left, and the full screen menu is here. All right, so yeah, it was inspired from this site here. So this is what we will be building today. To view more daily interactions and premium content, visit webdevforyou.com. Also, be sure to subscribe below to receive a notification every time there is a new daily interaction. Okay, so here I have a blank Webflow project, and we'll start with the daily interaction class naming convention. So it's d dash the daily interaction number and then the element. So every element on this site will have a d-17 in front of it, and this is for consistency purposes and so that we know we're working with daily interaction number 17. So the first thing I'll do here is add a section. So I'll add an element, I'll add a section, and I'll give the section the class name d-17 section. And I'll set the height to 100 VH. So it spans the full height of the viewport, and it will be the full width as well. Then I'll scroll down to background. I'll set the background color to black. And for the display setting, I'll set it to flex, justify center, and align center. So anything that I place within this section will be in the center. So we're going to place the menu trigger here in the center. So next I'll add the menu trigger wrapper, and we'll place the menu lines inside of that wrapper. So I'll add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give this div block the class name d-17. We're going to call it menu trigger actually, because we want so that if the user clicks anywhere inside of this menu trigger, the animation will occur. So for this menu trigger, I want it to have a width of 75 pixels by 75 pixels. I'm going to set it to a position of relative because those lines, those menu lines are going to be positioned absolute within the menu trigger, and I want it to be relative to the menu trigger and not relative to some other parent element like the section. So by setting the menu trigger to relative, anything inside of it will be relative to it. And the next thing I want to do is set a display setting of flex, justify center, and align center, so that the menu lines are all in the center. All right, looks good. So the next thing I'll do is add the menu lines. So let me go into the navigator and we'll look at what we've built so far. So we have the section and the menu trigger. So inside the menu trigger, I want to place the menu lines, and I'm going to place 4 lines. So I'm going to add an element, I'm going to add a div block, and I'm going to give this div block a width of 100% and a height of 5 pixels. So that'll be the height of the line and the width. So by setting it to 100% width, it fills the entire width of the parent element, which is the menu trigger. And I'm going to set a position of absolute because we're going to stack the menu lines on top of each other. Yeah, so first we're building out the menu trigger, and then we're going to add the interaction. So I want the menu lines to be stacked on top of each other so that within the interaction I can move them up and down and create the animation. So we'll set a position of absolute, and I'll give it a background color of white. And there we have the line, the class name. I'll give it the class name d-17 menu line. Okay, or I'll just say line. So just say d-17 line. Okay, So there we have the D-17 line, and I'll hit Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste until I have 4 lines. So it looks like we only have 1 line here within the designer, but because they have a position of absolute, they're actually stacked on top of each other. So yeah, that's all we need to do for the elements for this interaction. So we have the menu trigger and we have the lines within the trigger. So now within the interaction, we're going to move these lines around. So here I'll select D-17 menu trigger because we want the interaction to be we want this to be an interaction trigger. So I'll select it, go into interactions. Here where it says element trigger, I'll click the plus and I'll say mouse click or tap. So when the user clicks or taps, the interaction will occur. And on first click, we're going to start an animation and we're going to add a new timed animation. So I'll click the plus here and I'll name this D-17 first click. So this is what happens when the user first clicks on the menu trigger. And what I want to occur here is I want the first line and the third line to start at the bottom. Yeah, to start at the bottom. So, or the first line to start at the top and the third line at the bottom. So I'll go into the navigator, I'll select the first line. So you can picture these lines here. So this is line 1, 2, 3, and 4. So line 1 and 3 are going to go at the top and the bottom. So I'll select the line 1 here, go into interactions, add a new timed action. I'll say move, and we'll move it on the y-axis, so it moves up vertically. We'll move it 25 pixels, or -25 to move it up. Okay, so the first line moves up -25 pixels, and we're going to set it as the initial state, so that is where it initially starts. Okay, and then go into the navigator, I'll select the third line, go into the interaction, add a new timed action, I'll say move, and I'll move this down on the Y 25 pixels, so it moves down. So -25 moves up and 25 moves down. So as we can see, that third line has moved down, and I also want to set it as the initial state. All right, and then for the fourth line, I don't want it to be visible, so I'll select it here, go into the interactions, add a new timed action, and I'll say hide show, right? And then here I'll select display none, so we don't see that fourth line, and I'll also set it as the initial state. So what's going to happen, we're going to move line 1 down, and then we're going to hide it, then we'll move line 2 down, then we'll hide it, and then line 3 will move up, rotate, and then we'll bring in line 4 and have it rotate as well. Okay, so yeah, it'll make a bit more sense as I go through it. All right, so now that we have the lines here, yeah, these are the initial state, so we have like this hamburger icon. Now we're going to move things around. So the first thing I'm going to move is the first line. So I'm going to move it down. So I'll select it here in the navigator. I'll say move, and we'll move it on the Y to 0. So it goes back to the center, which is its original position. And then I'll add an easing of ease out expo and a duration of 0.3. And then I'll hide the line. So I'll add another timed action, say hide show, and then I'll say display none. So what happens is, yeah, we click, the line goes down, and then it disappears. Okay. So now we want to do the same for the second line. So the second line goes down and then it disappears. So I'll select it here and I'll say move. And this time I'm going to move it down -25 pixels. So it goes down. So I'll say -25. No, not -25, 25. So it goes down. Give it an easing of ease out expo and a duration of 0.3. And then I'll add another timed action. I'll say hide show and say display none. So that line disappears. So now if I click, we see that the first line goes down, disappears, the second line goes down and disappears, and now we just have the third line. So for this, I'm going to select the third line. I'm going to move it up, move it up to 0, so it goes to the center. And I'm going to add an easing of ease out expo, a duration of 0.3, and I'm also going to rotate it so that it rotates, yeah, for this one, I'm going to rotate it clockwise 45 degrees. So I'll say rotate, and on the Z, because I want it to rotate clockwise and not on the X or Y axis, so it doesn't rotate like this or like this. I just want it to rotate like in a circle. So on the Z index, I'll say 45 degrees. Okay, and I'm gonna start it with this line here. Yeah, so let's add an easing to when it moves up. So I'll say, oh, it already has the easing. Yeah, ease out expo 0.3, and the rotation, yeah, ease out expo and 0.3. I also want to start it with the movement. I want it to rotate as it's moving. So I'll just click, hold, and drag and place it on top of the move timed action. So now if I preview, I click. So yeah, we can see it does that there. So the third line moves up and then rotates 45 degrees. And for this, I also want to bring back the fourth line. So the fourth line is going to, yeah, so I select it here in the navigator. Then I'll say hide show, and I'll say display block. So now it appears, and we're also going to start it with the movement and rotation of the third line. So I'll just click, hold, and drag, place it right there. And then I'll rotate the fourth line. I'll say rotate, and I'll say negative 135 degrees. Yeah, negative 135. Okay, so yeah, I kind of entered in the wrong value for the first line, but we'll fix that. So here I'll say ease out expo, and I'll give it a duration of 0.3, and I'll also start it with the third line. So for the third line, we want to rotate it negative 45 degrees. Okay. Yeah, okay, perfect. So let's kind of backtrack a bit. So what we did, I'll kind of go through the whole interaction again. So the first and third line, we moved the first line up negative 25 pixels. The third line, we moved it down 25 pixels, and we hid the fourth line. Then we moved down the first line and hid it. Then we moved down the second line and hid it. And then for the third line, we moved it up back to 0. Then we rotated it negative 45 degrees, not 45, but negative 45. And then for the fourth line, we brought it back so we can see it. And then we rotated it negative 135 degrees. All right. And the third and fourth line are all animating together. So it creates kind of this, this synced up animation at the end. So now I'll preview and I'll click, and there we go. So the reason we gave the fourth line negative 135 degrees is so it has like almost a half rotation to create this interesting rotation animation at the end. So perfect, there we go. So there's the X. Yeah, so I kind of, instead of the third line rotating 45 degrees, say negative 45, and the fourth line rotates negative 135. Just wanted to cover that because I know I kind of, yeah, I said 45 degrees at first. Okay, so there we go. Now let's work on the second click. So I'll close this. So on second click, we're going to start an animation. I'm not going to duplicate the first click because it'll be easier if we just backtrack from the beginning and not copy any settings over from the first click. So here on second click, I'm going to start an animation. I'm going to add a new timed animation, and here I'm going to add add a new, well, let me select it here, and yeah, new timed animation, and let me rename it here to D-17 second click. And then for timed actions, I'll click the plus here, and the way we want this to work, so I actually wrote this down because there's a few steps to it, but first I want, yeah, so let's go here. If I click, so what I want to happen on the second click is I want the third and fourth line to go back to a rotation of 0. So it's just one line. Then I want to, yeah, so let's see, rotate the third and the fourth. Then I want to hide the fourth line. Then I'm going to move down the third line, and we'll move the second line and the first line up. Okay, so let's do that really quick. So here for the timed action, I'll select the third line, go into interactions, add a new timed action. I'll say rotate, and I'll say 0. So it goes back to 0. And for the easing, I'll say ease out expo, and a duration of 0.3. Then for the fourth line, I'll say rotate it back to 0, and add an easing of ease out expo and a duration of 0.3. And I'll start them together. So I'll click, hold, and drag and place them on top of each other. Now I'll preview, and when I click, it occurs. I click again, and they both go back to a rotation of 0. So now I'm going to hide the fourth line. So in the navigator, I'll select the fourth line, and I'll say hide show, and I'll say display none. Okay, so we only have the third line here. So now I'll preview, click, yeah, and the fourth line disappears. I'll actually, let me see here, if I start it with the first two. Yeah, no, so we don't, yeah, we want it to hide after the rotation occurs. So the next thing I'll do is I'll move down line 3. So line 3 is selected. I'll move it down 25 pixels. Yeah, or yeah, 25 pixels. And yeah, move it down 25 pixels. Looks good. I wonder why we still see a line there. So let me say ease out expo, duration of 0.3, and let's see. So okay, yeah, not sure why that line is showing up here in the designer, but it doesn't show up when we add the interaction. All right, so the next thing we want to do is bring back line 2. So here I'll select line 2, and I'll say hide show, and I'll say display block, and then I'll move line 2 up. So I'll say move it on the Y to 0, so it goes back to the center, or yeah, just say 0 pixels. Yeah, set an easing of ease out expo and a duration of 0.3, and I'm just gonna, you know, check it each time. Yeah, perfect. So that second line appears and goes back to 0, and then we're going to have the first line appear. So select line 1, say hide show, say display block, so it comes back in, and then move it to negative 25 pixels on the y-axis. For the easing, I'll say ease out expo and a duration of 0.3. So now I'll preview, and there we go. First click and second click, done. That's it. So yeah, that's how we created that menu trigger animation. So just to recap the second click, so we brought the third and fourth line to a rotation of 0, so it goes back to the center. Then we hid the fourth line. Then we brought the third line down 25 pixels. Then we brought back the second line, and the second line was at 25 pixels initially, because that's what we had it go to in the first click. So it starts at 25 pixels, so we brought it back in and then moved it back to 0, so that second line moves up. And then we brought back the first line, which was initially at a y-axis of 0. It was initially at 0, so we brought it back in, and then we moved that first line up negative 25 pixels. So yeah, so it goes first, then yeah, it goes down, then it rotates, and then we just reversed the animation. All right, so hopefully all of that was clear. It is a cool menu trigger. Just takes a few steps, and sometimes it helps to draw out what you want to occur with the animation. I know for this one I had to kind of draw it out because there was a few steps, and just writing it on paper helped to kind of make sense of all the movements and everything. But yeah, that's it for daily interaction number 17. If you did want to link this to like a menu wrapper or full screen menu, I'll cover that really quick. So here in the section, I'll add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give it a position of, let's say, fixed for the full screen menu, and I'll say full. Okay, so it fills the entire section. Let me make sure the section has a position of relative, so it's relative to the section. So there we have the div block. I'll name it D-17, D-17 menu wrapper, and we'll give it a background color of, we'll say blue because the menu trigger is white. So I'll say blue, and then we'll bring the menu trigger. Let's say we'll give it a Z index of something greater than 0, so 10, so it comes to the front. And then for this menu wrapper, what we'll do is go into the menu trigger interaction. The first click, we're gonna select the menu wrapper, and we're gonna move it. We're gonna add an initial state, so I'll say move, and on the X we'll say negative 100%, and we'll set it as the initial state, so it starts initially all the way to the left. And then when we click, when we first click the menu trigger, we'll have the menu wrapper move, and we'll move it back to 0%. I'll add an easing of ease out expo and a duration of 0.3. And I'll start it with the first line here. And yeah, that's it. So now I preview, I click, the menu comes in, and then all we have to do on the second click is move the menu wrapper. So I'll select it here in the designer or in the navigator. All we have to do is move it back to negative 100% on the second click, and I'll start it with the rotations and an easing of ease out expo. Duration of 0.5 is okay. Let me go into the first click, and let me just change this to 0.5 as well, so the menu is a bit slower coming in. So I'll click, the menu comes in, click again, that menu flies out. So that is it for this interaction. Looks good. I'd probably place the menu trigger somewhere in the upper left or upper right, and then place elements in the menu wrapper to create the similar effect here. Looks good. Yeah, so this effect was inspired by this website here, Kudos Memorabilia. And I think I've went over it enough here. Perfect. Great. So that is it for daily interaction number 17, the menu trigger animation on click. If you have any questions about anything I went over, definitely leave it in the comment section below or in the forum section for this video. So there are a few steps to create this interaction, but hopefully everything was clear. That's it for this video tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next daily interaction.